What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fresh Finance Podcast. My name is Thomas Elms. I have my co-host here, Kyle Ryan, as always. And today we are going to do a little bit of a psychology conversation today. We're going to really kind of talk about how to properly align the values, the personal values that you have around money with what you're actually doing with your money. And I think that this is becoming a really important topic of conversation because everybody's starting to plan. Social media is starting to really create much more identity and awareness for the idea of investing and the idea of planning for your future. Retirement is a pretty common thing now. Kyle, it's kind of funny to think about this before we kind of dive in, but retirement is kind of a young thing when you really think about it from a time perspective of even just the United States, right? Retirement wasn't a thing in the 1940s, right? It wasn't a thing in the 1920s during the Great Depression. This is something that is fairly new to our civilization, and we're starting to see so much of it. And I think that it's happening so quickly that a lot of people don't necessarily know how to do it, but also do it in a way where it truly like aligns with where they're trying to go in their life. And, before we get started, I'd love to just kind of get your take on this conversation in particular and what you're looking forward to talking about today.
Well, I love that you brought up that retirement's a young thing, because I always love the fun fact that Social Security, when it was introduced, that came around in the FDR days when we were in World War II.
Yeah,
That was introduced. The full retirement age at the time, I believe it was 65. Do you know what the life expectancy at the time
probably
was?
like 67.
65. So
Oh, God.
you were not supposed to be able to, it was supposed to be, you're done working. This is Social Security. This is what you get to live on, because you can't work anymore. That never really existed before. So you're right. Retirement in that sense is a new thing. And ever since that, the world's gotten a lot more complicated, especially the financial world. There's a lot of different things that you have to maneuver. There's all these jargon terms. What do I do? My Roth IRA, my traditional IRA, when do I take Social Security? There's all these long goals that are becoming more and more complex over time. But in terms of just, setting goals and aligning them with your wealth today, your current financial picture, I think that's so important. Because how many times have we heard someone say, I want to retire? Great. When do you want to retire? I don't know, like 65, 62. Well, what makes you set those dates? I don't know. It's when my dad retired, or it's when my friend retired. So it's always, these close to personal experiences that shape our own goals. Or, I want to buy a house. Well, when are you going to do that? I don't know, when I have enough. What we want to do today is help separate and more likely align the idea of what you have today, what you want in the future, and creating an actionable plan on how to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And just kind of diving into that, I think the first thing that I kind of wanted to bring up was, and we were talking about this a little bit offline. I know we talk about this very, very often, at least just when we're kind of talking about client experiences and how to be better as advisors, is when you're talking about a person's psychology of money, how they view money in the first place, but also how they want to utilize money to essentially get what they're looking for in their own life. They're operating from either their own personal experience or from a small number of people that are either friends or family who are willing to share an experience with them that they've had. And so their overall selection of wisdom is fairly limited. And normally they tend to leverage a small number of people for, I would say, money decisions or money thoughts on a continuous basis. So they're not necessarily getting new information, right, from different people. But as an advisor, that is a very different situation because we're normally leveraging the knowledge, wisdom, and experience that we've been able to collect while working with tons of different clients, right? That could be 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, 300 plus different clients with their own unique, sets of circumstances and situations that allow us to provide the type of advice that we're providing. And I think financially, but also psychologically, when you're trying to align yourself with your money from a values-based perspective, we've got the opportunity to help kind of bridge those gaps in a way that most people can. Is that something that you've kind of felt in your practice as far as talking with clients on a day-to-day basis about how they view this whole conversation of money?
Absolutely. Like I say, you're close experiences are what it's going to like set your vision, like your peers, the people around you, what they do, your parents, your family, what they've
Yeah.
done in your financial life. If that's all that's all you're going to set your goals to, or you might
Yeah.
shoot above and beyond. But that's why I like the saying, keep finance personal. Finances are the most, personalized thing out there. The answer to most financial planning questions are, it depends. It depends on your unique circumstances, your unique goals. So yes, we see this all the time. Everyone comes in, I want to do XYZ based on this, but we have seen the same type of person in so many different roles with so many different circumstances that we're able to see, yes, your goal might be this, or you might be thinking this, but have you considered this? And being able to bring a different sort of perspective into the equation here is really powerful for a lot of people, because it's like, wow, I never thought about that, or I didn't know I could do that. And it's like, that's what we're here for, right? To be able to help people make more well-informed decisions.
Yeah. And I think, just to dive a little bit into some of the more specific pieces here, it's weighing questions about, how do I really want to approach my money management? How early do I want to try and retire? Where do I want to live when I'm retired? How do I want people to see me when it talks, when you're talking about the lens of money? Because we always end up having some sort of conversation, about somebody else and how they viewed money, and there's always somebody who you have a very positive opinion on of how they, utilize their money. And there's normally always somebody that you have a negative opinion on, right? And it's kind of figuring out how you can kind of be in that positive category. I'm not saying you need to structure your life on somebody else's personal opinion, but normally if you do it well, somebody else is going to think highly of you, right? And I think there's a really good case in point. So I have two completely different sets of clients, won't say names, obviously, but they both live in the state of Kansas, and they both are the same age. They have spouses, they're married, and they're in their mid-50s. And I think this is just a perfect dichotomy of what we're trying to portray here. Is one couple is hell-bent on covering all college expenses for their two children, and they want to leave as much money as they possibly can when they pass away to their two children. The other couple has three children, and they barely want to cover any college, and they barely want to leave anything, because they knew some people who were who inherited a lot of money from their parents, and they essentially just changed, and so they don't want their kids to do that, through an inheritance from them. And when you really kind of think about that, it seems very common, but the way that I look at that is picture you yourself are trying to go to both of those people for advice on money, right? The way that they view a question that you ask them is probably going to be completely different, right? Because if you ask them about, hey, like, what should I do to fund my kids' college education? Family one's going to be like, you need to set up a 529 plan. You need to start it as soon as they are born, and try and, put in as much as you can in there each year. Family number two is going to be like, why are you trying to cover that? Like, are you just trying to give them a free handout? You're going to get very different opinions in something like that, and kind of recognizing that there are limitations that any one individual who's not a financial professional can provide when it comes to talking about financial guidance.
I think the most important thing about that whole thing is that, having said all that, there's no right or wrong answer, right?
Yeah, there's not.
Right? Everyone has their own unique goals, values, right? So if that's how
Yeah.
they envision raising their children, then power to them, right? So that's everyone has, and a great example. I'm glad you brought that up, because everyone's goals are different, and how we're going to structure and how they're going to plan out their lives is going to be different accordingly to their goals.
Yeah.
And even taking it a step further, you're talking about two couples who have different view sets. Imagine if you have one couple, two different view sets within there, right? So like you can have a married couple, or two partners who are together, but they might manage their money separately, or they might have goals that are different than one another. And this is the crux of the whole thing, is communication. Be on the same page with your partner, be on the same page with your spouse, be on the same page with your advisor, your team of advisors, because if we don't know what your goals are, we're not going to be able to help you properly. Well, if we can't identify them, we can't work toward them. That's pretty easy. But, just making sure you're on the same page about what your goals are. And we can move into this, is identify your goals. That is the most important thing. If you are working toward different things, you never talk about it, you'll never know. So the first step of any of this is identifying what it is that is important to you from a financial perspective. What are your goals? You know, where do you want to live? Like Thomas mentioned before, when do you want to retire? What kind of house do you want to retire in? Do you want to travel? Like all these different things. You want to have a legacy. Understanding this is the first step in working toward these goals. You have to have them set in order to work toward them. Because, you know, I love this saying. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We don't plan to fail, we fail to plan.
Mhm.
And it speaks volumes. The longer dated your goal is, the more requirement, the more impetus there is to have a plan set in stone for it. If you're planning something 3 months out, there's not a lot of wiggle room between now and then in order to get your objective done. You must have already done all your planning. You're talking
Yeah.
about 10, 20, 30 years out. You've got a lot of time to be able to plan for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that we tend to structure this is you're building out a set of goals that are, you've got short-term goals, mid and long-term. And the way that we look at that is anything short is a year or less. Anything midterm is 2 to 10 years. And that's normally not including any sort of retirement conversations. This is more like any sort of major life events, major purchases. That could be new cars, new homes, new boats, major vacations. This could be anything, outside of the country that normally is a lot more expensive. This could be having children. This could be moving. This could be changing careers. Those are the type of midterm goals or conversations that we're having. And then long term is definitely going to be more like retirement. It's going to be more like, relocation after retirement, things of that nature. And what's interesting is you normally have to do the alignment before you start setting the goals. I think that's the reason why most people probably don't do as much planning as they could be doing, or they also aren't necessarily as successful with their planning as they could be. Because if you're just kind of blindly setting goals, but there's no attachment to your values and the depth of who you are, you're not going to have a lot of buy-in to getting those goals actually done. Right. I think that's something that a lot of people miss, is they're just kind of blindly setting goals that they think they should be setting, and they're kind of half into doing the goals. Right. And that's what I see with my own clients is, when we get true buy-in from people, it's normally done by aligning these two parts as one. And they are starting to see the who, what, when, where, and why, the why in particular of what we're doing. And the one thing that I want you to talk about, because we were talking about this offline, is when you're setting these short, mid, and long-term goals, recognizing that there are trade-offs, there are pros and cons that you need to actively weigh when you're essentially setting these goals and making these decisions, and recognizing that these goals can align with your values. But also recognizing too, I'd love to hear your take on this, is your goals and your values are probably going to change throughout your life, right? When you're in your mid-20s, the things that you hold most dear are probably going to be a lot different than when you're in your 50s.
Yep.
Right. And just kind of recognize
kids. Yeah. Anytime. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of different life changes that you go through that are going to completely, shift your perspective. Yeah. But to similar what you were saying, that's why I think, we kind of talked about this offline, the essence of the importance of setting what we call SMART goals.
Yeah.
Right. They're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're realistic, and they're time bound. If you come in here and you say, I want to live in the most expensive area in the world, and I want to travel, I want to have timeshare, whatever, I want to have condos in all these different places, and you just don't have the financial power to do so, you don't have the money to do so, it's not an achievable goal. If it's something you want to do 30 years down the line, we can start saying, okay, well, you need X, Y, and Z income to be able to do this, but they need to, first and foremost, in my opinion, they need to be achievable. They need to be realistic goals. From there, you want to have a time set of, diamonds are made under pressure, right? I work best with timelines, deadlines, because otherwise, if I say I want to get a house, great, I'll buy a house in 10 years. No, I want a house next year. I know that I want to buy a $400,000. No, I want to buy a $400,000 house. If I want to have 3.5% down, I need to have X amount saved. I need to be ready for the closing costs, move in, and I need to have that dollar amount that I want, specific time, so that I can start saving money each month to be able to do that.
Yep.
Works the same with any goal. Know how much you want to spend, and start saving for it. Most importantly, along with what you were saying before, is prioritization of your goals, because they change. I believe so strongly in setting a value to each of your goals, right? So if you have, everyone has, we all have $10 worth of wishes and $6 in our pockets, right? So you have to list out all your goals that you have, separate them, as Thomas mentioned, by time horizon, right? Short, medium, long term, and then set values to them, right? If I want to buy a home and that's really important to me, but I also want to travel, right? Say I want to go to Europe, but owning a home is way more important to me. Maybe I'll set that, on an arbitrary scale of like 0 to 10. I'll put buying a home as 9, traveling to Europe is 4. It
Yeah.
wouldn't be in the order, by the way, if you're asking me, because I want to go to Europe. But
Yeah.
but you can look at that and you're like, okay, well, I want to make sure that my top priority goal is achieved. And I know that's my priority goal because I marked it, so I can start saving aggressively towards that.
Yeah.
It's the same way, not exactly in the same conversation, but it's the same way about how I look at my expenses, right? So you can kind of give yourself a score on your expenses. And if I really value going out to eat, because I don't like cooking. If I really value going out, a couple nights a week and going out to eat, and I really value that, then you know what? I'm not going to feel guilty about spending money on that. But if I go and, I'm going to the bar, I'm buying coffee or something, it doesn't really give me any sort of satisfaction, I'm going to rate that lower, and hopefully I'm going to be able to cut that out. Because what you want to do is you want to be able to live a guilt-free life of spending. And that goes for goals, that goes for your everyday expenses. You want to be able to just make sure you find value in what you're spending on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of it is just having routine check-in on these things, right? We're creating goals, but we're also monitoring and updating these goals throughout time, right? Because, right now, if somebody's 30 years old, we could say, I want to retire. A long-term goal could be, I want to retire at 60 with $3 million, right? And if you just write that goal down and then just never look at it again, like, where are we at, right? Or if you write that goal down and then just set your 401k at 5% contributions and just never do anything again, like, you're probably not going to get there. But recognizing that once you set these goals, you've got to create an action plan as well that not only gets you there, right, where you're aligning, you're actually putting into play how much money needs to get contributed, or what accounts we need to set up, or what things do we need to do in order to attain that, and then actively following up and getting some points in time at where we're seeing if we're on track, and making sure that you can do that. And that's a lot of what our job as advisors is to make sure that we're monitoring and updating the overall goals for someone or a family in a timely manner. And I think that's kind of another piece is why we can get to this point of providing more value than just maybe day-to-day management or even just advice, just kind of being there to follow up. And I think this perfect example, kind of a side note, I think this is a perfect example of how follow-up can be helpful. I have a car, obviously, and I just crossed 90,000 miles, and I've needed to set up my 90,000 mile service appointment, whatever it's called, for the last like month, right? And I just haven't done it. And all I literally need to do is just make a phone call, right? Just to get my 90,000 mile checkup. And, it takes about half a day, good to go. It's not a big deal. I just haven't done it, right? Now, cars are not that important to me, right? As long as my car runs, that's okay, right? But the way that I should be thinking about it is, hey, this is something that I've purchased that I need to maintain and that I need to make sure that I'm keeping up with in order for it to run in a healthy manner for as long as possible. Because here's what happened. Yesterday, I was on the highway, and on 2 separate occasions, my transmission was a little shifty, right? Wasn't necessarily getting into that next gear very quickly. And that's when I started to realize I have waited way too long, right? I've waited way too long to schedule this checkup. So that's what I did first thing this morning. It's kind of like, if I wish that at 90,000 miles, my service person at the dealership could have just known that and given me a call.
Yeah.
Right. It would have made my life a whole easier. And then we could have just scheduled it right there. But I didn't have that.
I love that. It's basically like having an accountability partner, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially what it is for your goals. And is in Kansas, you have to get it every 10,000 miles? Is that what it is?
It's not. No, it's just what I grew up on. Just kind of the general guideline is every 10,000 we're getting
ours here in PA is a requirement once a year. So I get like 15 calls from different places saying, hey, come get your It's
Really?
actually a good thing. It's
Yeah.
a pain in the neck. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's another fantastic example. It's about keeping yourself accountable. Because if you just set and forget, works for your 401k, not for your life.
Yeah.
Because look, it's opportunity cost. And I love that word. What does opportunity cost mean? If I spend money here, that means I can't spend it here. Right. If
Mhm.
I go buy a home, I can't fund my Roth, just whatever example. So at the end of the day, if you're a W-2 employee, if you're a business owner, if you're making money, you are trading time for dollars. And at some point, that has to switch. And at that point, most likely, you're not going to want to keep trading your time for dollars because you've been doing that for years. So again, it all goes back to if you've done all of this, all these years, you want to maximize those dollars, which hence maximizes the time you spend putting into them. And quite frankly, in my opinion, it can't be done without a solid, actionable plan. Because otherwise you're just winging it.
Yeah.
And winging it works sometimes, but I don't want my financial life to be wung.
Absolutely. Yeah. We need to figure out is it winged? What's the
That's the
past
best.
tense of wing, huh?
I'm gonna go with wung. I like that.
Yeah, I kind of like that too. But anyway, that kind of summarizes up the episode. And, one of the things that we'd love to see is if somebody's watching this, they've never talked to me or to Kyle, reach out to us and let's just get an initial call that just specifically kind of talking about the depths of aligning your money and your values. If that's something that you're interested in. And, we don't have to go super deep into your personal situation. We can if you'd like, but let's just have a conversation about that. I think that there's so much productiveness that can come from, just having a general conversation on maybe how to better consider that in your own personal situation. So if you're watching this and you're interested in doing it, feel free to reach out to Kyle and I, and we'd love to set up a time with you. Until then, though, we will definitely touch base with everybody next time on the next episode. Thanks.